Thanks for tuning in to Product Chats. On today's episode, I talk with Megan Berry, who's the VP of Product at Octane AI, and we talk about work-life balance and remote work. So hope you enjoy the show, and don't forget to leave us a review. Hey, Megan, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so in a minute or less, can you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, I'm VP product at a company called Octane AI. And before that, I was VP product at a company called Rebel Mouse. And I started my career earlier on focused on marketing and community management. I live in Portland, Oregon, and I'm also a mom to one kid.
Awesome. And then let's talk about kind of how you started in product, right? Like what that journey looked like.
Yeah, well, I started out my career doing community management and I got really good at listening to customers, listening, building community and understanding the power of it. And I think where it took me is I wanted to act on that. So it's like, oh, people really want this or there's this like underlying desire and I really wanted to like get on the other side of things and I sort of slowly made my way there with like sort of leveraging that knowledge of the customer I had. So I still approach product with a very customer first approach, which of course is very in vogue.
Yes. And with that, let's talk a little bit more about like how you actually do that. Obviously, you started out listening to your customers and now you're listening to your customers. So let's talk about how you do that today and what that involves.
Oh gosh, so many ways. So Octane AI, we're a zero party data marketing platform for Shopify merchants. So our customer are Shopify merchants, which are just really awesome businesses of all sizes, lots of small businesses, medium businesses. And I love getting on calls with our customers and hearing directly from them what they need. But we have account management and sales and an amazing customer success team. So it's about keeping in touch with those teams as well as making sure me and the other people on my product team are getting on calls with customers directly. So it's a lot of things for sure, but I think it's incredibly important.
And so with that, right, you mentioned sales and success and support. What are some ways that you like to work kind of collaboratively to make sure I know all these different like parts of a company are so important to building a product? How do you make sure you work best with those teams?
Yeah, I think you have to get to know, especially like Octane is a startup, so we're, on the smaller side. And so you're talking about handful of people on each team. And so with that size of company, you really want something that works for those people on those teams. And so for us, what we do is we have monthly syncs with each department. So we have a monthly AM product sync, a monthly sales product sync, et cetera. But customer success at Octane AI right now actually reports up into product. So we're very closely linked and are part of the same team. So that's a little unusual as well.
So with that, I think you bring up a great point, right? Around the structure of teams and the structuring. So can you tell us a bit more about why you put that team under product and how that really helps you like grow as a company?
Good question. I don't think it's necessary. Like, obviously, in most places, customer success doesn't report into product. And I think that we could, as we get larger, it's possible that that could shift at some point. So I don't think it's necessary. What I do think is necessary is that customer success and product have to have an amazing relationship because that is such valuable feedback you're getting directly from customers and you want to make sure that like in some places it can almost be antagonistic like oh stop bugging me about that bug and that's not going to make the product better. You need to make sure that it's very clear you're on the same team to help customers as much as possible.
And I think with that also, right? Like it's all about the customer at the end of the day. And you can see that tension at a lot of companies because different teams are like a sales team or success or support, right? Is saying, hey, I need this feature. I need you to build this out. And product saying, wait, that doesn't actually align with our company goals. Or, hey, we have these other priorities. And so I think exactly what you're saying, it's so important to have that alignment around, hey, we're all working for the same goal. It's just we may need to prioritize things differently than you see. Like that's, I think, a big piece of product is we see this bigger picture. Like I'm in sales, so I say, oh, I need this to close this deal, right? And I may be missing that piece of, hey, this isn't affecting that many customers, or what is their why? Why do they need this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like a big thing we try to do and is so important to have good relationships with other teams is present like the tough decisions as well. Like we really want to build this, but we'd have to give up this because I think that's when people can really understand why product is making those decisions because of course we'd all love to build everything. It just isn't possible.
Yes. And I think with that, right, it's you bring up a great point around communication, around, hey, we need to communicate. And I think this is also with customers about setting expectations of we may not always build this thing out, but we will communicate to you about our strategic like vision or where we're going so you at least can understand. And I think that gets to the point of like the human connection of product of like, hey, we're going to communicate with you. You may not always get what you want, but we're listening to you and we care about you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important to me, like internally, and then of course with customers as well as an organization, but internally that product answer every question that the team has. Sometimes product in certain companies can be a little more hands off and obviously depends on the size of the team. But I want us to be very responsive. So if we can't do something, I try to always have us explain why and build that sort of empathy in other departments for why we're making a certain decision as opposed to like, oh, they just said no.
Yes. And I think that's important for both internal and external stakeholders, right? Internal are your success, your sales, your support, your C suite, right? And then your external are your customers. And I think it's just that piece, like you mentioned, right? Like the human aspect of like empathy and understanding. Yes, we understand what you need. It may not be what we're building out, but we understand you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's kind of pivot a bit and let's talk about remote work.
Awesome.
So, on that subject, I know that you've been like remote work is this hot topic. A lot of people kind of have transitioned recently ever since the pandemic happened, but I know you've been basically doing remote work for 10 years. So, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it used to be like a hard sell. Like people would always, when I said I was working remotely or with remote teams, people would be like, "Oh, how does that work? Like, how do you get work done? Like, what if you need to talk to someone? What do you do?" And now, of course, almost everyone, like everyone in tech certainly has experienced it for at
Mhm.
least a year and a half, often more. And they understand like actually it works pretty well because you know what most people need to do good work focus time in an ideal environment. And you can set that up for yourself at home in a way that the office doesn't always lend itself to. I personally, and I've heard this story from many other people, I don't work best in an open office. It's distracting and I can't focus. And I work better in a quiet environment.
I used to go into work every single day. And as soon as like remote work started to happen, I was very hesitant. I thought, oh, well, I'm going to miss this human aspect. And I think through tools like Slack and other Zoom and other tools, you still have the ability to connect with your team. Yes, you're not in person, but it's just about saying, hey, let's set some time on the calendar. Hey, do you have 5 minutes? And really connecting with those people to say, let's actually set some time aside to connect.
Yeah, absolutely. I think remote work lends itself really well to having a lot of structure around how you connect. And I think truthfully, a lot of in person environments could have benefited from that structure, but you can get around it when you're in person. But remote work forces people to have that sense of like, okay, we need that weekly one to one. We need like monthly, like fun chats or like whatever it is that the team needs. And it will vary per team, but like thinking about it and really being thoughtful about what you're doing makes any team better in person or remote.
Yeah. And I think with that also, like you bring up a great point of like be intentional, right? Like I would say a lot of times companies will just have all of these meetings because everyone was in the office. So it was, hey, let's get everyone together. And I think it allows people to put more intention behind meetings. So I want to talk about like because you've been doing remote work for so long, what are some of your like tips and tricks around remote work?
Okay, I do have a bunch. All right, I'll try to give you like a quick run
Yeah.
through here. So, okay,
Yeah.
one, clear ownership is really, really important. So, again, I think also true in office, but you can get away with it more. If you don't know who's running with something, it will get left behind. So, clear ownership and clear next steps, sharing the why behind what you're doing and sharing assumptions. Too often in like remote environments, we don't get that visual cue of like the other person looking like confused, or like maybe they're more hesitant to ask that question because they have to write it out. And so make sure you're sharing as much as possible why you're doing something so the other person can really participate in the whole mission and the whole thought. I'm a big believer also in embracing async in remote work. It doesn't always have to be a meeting. Meetings often suck, and so they can be good, but question every meeting you have to make sure it's really necessary to be a meeting, because I think we've all been there where a meeting was actually should have been an email, right? And it's like someone's just like, "Here's my presentation and I'm going to update you all." And there's no discussion, and it really didn't need to happen at that specific time. So I think a
Mhm.
remote work is perfectly set up for async, so that's huge. And then with that async comes all these pieces around how not to be a jerk in written communication, which I think probably all gotten better at, but watch your tone, think about using emojis and GIFs, even if they feel silly, they can really help when you're writing things down. And if you're going to veer towards negativity, do it one to one and consider doing it in a call instead of written.
I think those are some great like tips and tricks. I think also the piece, right, is you mentioned the piece around being clear about like the thought process and running for it. And I think on the other side, it also allows people to take responsibility for their own communication and speak up where maybe they didn't feel comfortable speaking up in a in-person meeting, right? And they said, "Oh, you know what? Hey, I'm struggling with this." So I think it's on both sides, right? Be very open and clear about what you're doing and offering help. I think that's especially something as a leader, right? Hey, here's what we're doing. Here's the vision. I'm here to be a resource. But also, like, giving your team the space to say, hey, I don't know how to do this, or I'm very confused, and having that, creating that environment so that people can say, like, hey, I don't know actually. Can you help me?
Yeah, I that's something I think about as I onboard people. Like what I have like an onboarding like Google Doc that I give out that has like sort of like different things about onboarding and like first month priorities and things like that. But one of the things that's very central there is please ask questions. There are no dumb questions. Like, please question what we're doing. It's probably not like, I think there's a temptation sometimes when you start somewhere to be like, oh, they must be doing this for a good reason. And that's not always true. So I really encourage people to like question their assumptions they're making as they join and like bring that fresh perspective and then hopefully continue that throughout the relationship. I really try, and I'm sure I'm not perfect at it, but I really try to make sure when people do question thinking and bring up questions that I respond to that really positively so they continue to do it.
Yep. I think that's the only way to get better is to create that safe space around, hey, question this, right? We want this. Speak up if you don't understand this. And then it also creates better relationships because someone understands the reasoning and they're like, oh, this makes sense, right? Or I don't get this. And let's actually, maybe there's a different solution, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the best solutions that, have happened in my career were from that, right? I was on this, in this space and imagining this thing, and then the other person was somewhere completely different. We talked about the end goal and they suggested something that was way better than my idea. And that's where the magic happened.
Then you talked about onboarding, and let's touch a little bit on that and some best practices that you kind of use when you're onboarding, especially since it's remote. Like, what are some best practices you follow? Obviously, you said like creating a comfortable space, allowing people to ask questions and challenge ideas, but what else are things that you include in your onboarding for new team members?
Yeah, totally. I think it does vary by department, but talking about products specifically, it's about a balance between making sure people have as much information as possible, but also giving them the space to deal with that. And so I try to set up usually at least the first week, like a daily meeting and a check in of what are you supposed to be checking in on? What are you supposed to be learning? And making sure I'm available for questions, but I also encourage them to look through the available documentation we have to set up one to ones with all the key stakeholders. Like as soon as possible, I want them to feel like when they have a question, they know how to go about answering it. And beyond just asking me, but of course, I encourage them to ask me if they can't figure it out.
So I think you also bring a great point, which is something that's super important as a product manager is being resourceful. And it's not just always say, and this is something I've struggled with in my career, not always going to the person just saying, hey, how do I do this? It's, hey, here's the resources. Let me actually think on bigger picture. Do I actually need to go to Megan, or do I need to go to this document? Or maybe there's other team members that have experience with this. And I think that's something also that I've seen work really well with teams is, hey, when you come on board, some teams will have like a lunch where it's every time they have virtual lunch where a new team member comes on and they all talk, and it creates kind of this still like team environment to allow people to get to know people a little bit better and what they do. And then, hey, maybe I have a question about, let's say, APIs or whatever it is. Someone specialized in that. Okay, let me reach out to that person versus going straight to Megan and asking her about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it makes a big difference if you've had a casual conversation with someone before you need like an actual answer from them. So that's why it's like for product managers, and I think it could be a group call. I think that works also for depending on company size, one to ones, but something where you've had that casual
Mhm.
chat. What do they do? What do they care about? What do they care about outside of work too? Then when you have a question for them, you already have that relationship built in and you can capitalize on it.
So, on the subject of remote work, I think there's a big concept around this of work life balance. So, let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think remote work can be incredible for work life balance because you're in the space you want to be. You don't have to be in a certain location. You don't have to be like you can, pick up your kids from school or you can go to the gym and it doesn't necessarily need to be before or after work. It can be at the time that makes sense for that. But it also, if you don't structure your day, can be a disaster. It can lead to huge burnout. And I know in the pandemic, that's been a real issue for people because, now things are a little different, but especially like beginning of the pandemic, a lot of people didn't have a lot else to do. And so work became the thing they threw themselves into. And then they got burned out because they weren't doing anything else. So I think, like, as a remote worker, you have to set those boundaries for yourself. And they can be different based on who you are. Some people like to set clear hours. Some people like to have like spaces and breaks throughout the day. It's what's important is that it works for you and that you're productive.
Yep. And out of curiosity, since you've been remote for 10 years, obviously, I think you bring up a great point about do what's best for you. I think in all cases, it's about that, right? Do what's best for you, what's going to give you the best work life balance. But whatever you found works best for you in terms of structure and like the way you meet with your team and kind of, I know we're online a lot of times. So how do you kind of set those boundaries and make sure you have this balance?
Yeah, great question. And for me, it has evolved. So, like earlier in remote work, I did more of that sort of like work life integration where I would like first thing check work, then like go to the gym. I was living in New York at the time. I was really into Soul Cycle. So I would go to Soul Cycle, come back, shower, then do more work, then maybe like take a walk in the afternoon. And like there was like lots of periods in the day where I was working, but I was also taking breaks. So there was less definition, but it worked and I liked it. But now I have a kid. And so now I found that setting more boundaries around my hours works better for me because I need childcare when I'm working. And when I don't have childcare, I want to pay attention to my kid.
Mhm. So I think with that, right, it's just, especially for like, and I think this is women in tech, there's a lot of moms in tech, there's a lot of dads in tech. And so it gives also new parents the ability to spend more time with their kids. Because if you had been commuting into an office that may have been like, I mean, when I was commuting, I think it was just 15 minutes, but still that would be in your case, who knows how long your commute was, but that could be an additional, for a lot of people, they were commuting like an hour, and that would be 2 extra hours in your day that you wouldn't be able to spend time with your kid.
Yeah, exactly. Spend more time with the people you want to spend time with, not just the people you happen to work with. Like of course, it's better, right?
Yes. And I think with that, like that's a great piece of advice is spending more time with the people that you love, right? And the people, your family. Obviously, you're doing this work and finding what works for you and finding that like balance. But on the subject of work-life balance, let's talk a little bit about parental leave.
Yeah, so this is something that I'm really passionate about. There's kind of two pieces to it. Like, obviously, I think companies should have parental leave. It should be good. What does good mean is a big question. But the second piece of it for me is I really think parental leave should be equal for all parents. And I'm saying that even though I am a mom, I don't like policies where the primary parent gets more time because my husband is not a secondary parent to my child. We are both parents. And I think it's important that someone of, any gender who is having a kid have the opportunity to bond with that kid and to spend that time, and not to make some people feel like they're not as important as parents. And parents need that time to bond with a newborn and also just to survive. It's a hard time. You're not getting much sleep. You're going to be more productive if you have the time off rather than trying to jump back into work.
Yeah, and I think that's you bring up a great point with that, right? Of like in this day, it used to be that moms would stay home, right? And that's probably the reason why it came up that way is because moms were stay at home, right? And so now I've seen a shift. I know it's not equal at all companies, but have seen a shift where they're becoming more equal in parental leave for both like moms and dads.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there, as we move towards less sexism in work and in the world, hopefully, there are things that need to get better for women, but there are also things that need to get better for men. They should also be part of taking care of a kid, have the time off to be home with that kid. And also, then from a company perspective, it's an important shift because you don't want companies to have these incentives that, like, oh, well, if we have more men, they don't need as much parental leave. And it's like there's all this stuff behind the scenes. No, everyone who has a kid is a parent, no matter their gender or whether they were pregnant, and they should have time off to bond with that kid.
Agreed. So on that note, I want to pivot a bit. And what's one piece of advice you would give to an aspiring product leader?
Yeah, I would say make sure you are thinking about empathy above all as you're dealing with your team, your customers, other departments in the company. If you're understanding where they are coming from, you're going to be more effective at motivating, which is such an important part of being a product leader. You have to motivate a lot of people and departments who you don't have direct responsibility over. So I think empathy would be my top piece of advice.
Great. And then are you hiring currently?
Yes, we are hiring for a couple roles right now, and you can look them up at octaneai.com. We are not hiring on the product side, but other sides.
Perfect. And then where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter. My handle is at Megan Berry.
Perfect. Well, thanks for coming on today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks again to Megan for joining us on today's episode of Product Chats. For more product management resources, head to cami.io/blog, and we'll see you next time.